I go ahead and put oil in the engine now. That oil sump holds 8 quarts. Ordinarily I only run about 7 quarts in it when I change the oil and stuff. It seems like if you run a full 8 quarts on it, it just blows out the first quart anyway. And then the more oil you have in there, the more heat it retains, the higher temperature the engine stays, because you have a whole bunch of heat sink there. The oil absorbs the heat and holds it in more. But I'm going to run the full 8 quarts in there this time because we've got the whole system to fill up there. We've got the accessory case that's got to be all filled up, and oil filter is going to be filled up, and oil cooler has got to be filled up. That's empty. So we'll go ahead and put the full 8 quarts in there. This is the second quart there. It's just about in now. And there's the case of oil. I'm old, I guess. I remember when a case, whether it's a case of beer or a case of pop or a case of oil, came in 24s. Aeroshell was the first one to come out with a synthetic or semi-synthetic aviation oil, and when they came out with that, they went to 12 packs because the price was so much higher than the regular oil. That was the way they could get it so sticker shock wasn't so bad. And that wasn't too bad because most of the large aircraft engines use 12 quarts in them, 185s and stuff like that. Of course, bigger engines, radial engines, use gallons of oil, but most of the aviation fleet uses between 8 and 12 quarts. And somewhere along the line, 12 quarts in a case became the standard, and now you go buy a case of beer, it's 12. If you buy a case of pop, it's 12. Actually, some places now I see where they're putting 10 in a case for pop. But Aeroshell here on this oil, they've dropped down the case to 6. I use the Aeroshell 100, which is uncompounded straight mineral oil, for break-in oil. So when I change the cylinder or put a new engine on or something like that, and you run break-in oil in it for a while until the rings seat, when I go get a case of oil, I got to get 2 of them because there's only 6 in a case, and it costs more. And that was even before the inflation hit like it has now, where they're reducing the size of everything, putting 3 potato chips in a potato chip bag and putting 2 peanuts in a Snickers bar and stuff like that. I'll get the oil dumped in here. Then the next thing to do is start working on putting the exhaust on there. I got that hose put on there, and I put an extra clamp on it over there to support it where it hangs down off the firewall. I went ahead and torqued down those bolts that hold the engine mount to the frame, to the firewall, and put cotter pins in those. So everything is safety wired. I got the alternator bolts are safety wired, the quick drain is safety wired, the oil temperature gauge probe is safety wired, and the oil filter is safety wired. I got cotter pins on the engine mount bolts, both engine mount bolts, both the ones the engine mounts to the bolt to the engine mount, and the engine mounts to the airframe pin. Those are torqued and cotter pin. All the connections, the throttle, the mixture, and the carburetor heat controls are all cotter pinned. Dipstick tube is in and it's safety wired down. Crankcase ventilation tube is in and clamped down with hose clamps. I got 8 quarts of oil in the engine. So the next step is to put the exhaust system on there. This thing's probably going to smoke like a son of a gun when I first started up. There's cover plates over everything. It did a really good job of sealing this engine up when they sent it from the factory. There was a cover plate over the carburetor mount. I pulled that off. The oil drained out of it. I washed it out a little bit before I put the carburetor on. I just took the covers off the exhaust ports. Oil just dumped out of it, so I took some sawdust and put down on the floor to soak up some of the oil there that's dripping out, and I'll let those drain out a little bit for a while, and then we'll wash them out with some solvent before I put the exhaust system on. This is the plate that was on the exhaust port. It's actually got an O-ring in it and everything. It's sealed up pretty good because oil didn't start coming out of there until I pulled these down a little bit. I got the exhaust stacks up for the number 3 and number 4 cylinders. The main one there is the number 3 cylinder. It comes out around this side and it actually goes into the muffler on the other side, and then number 4 cylinder slides into the number 3 cylinder. And there's 2 bolts on the exhaust ports of the engine that hold the stacks on. And then there's a gasket that goes in there. This is one type of a gasket here. This is copper on 2 sides with asbestos or something like that in between. It's probably not asbestos anymore, but something like that in between. There's another type that is basically just this shape, but it's just a stamped steel, and it has a little ridge in it. Those are what's standard. Those what usually comes with the cylinder kits and stuff, and they're crap. They don't last very long at all. They start blowing out right away. These last a little bit better, but they're still not as good. And then we have these here. I don't remember what these are called. They have a compression ring in the middle here, a steel ring in the middle, and they're heavy steel, and they work better. Some of the guys reuse these, but whenever I take an exhaust system off, a stack off for some reason, I always replace them with new. This is what the end of the exhaust looks like. It's just got the 2 ears on here. Now this is pretty heavy, but they're not as good as like what's on the Continental 0470 and 520, as those have 4 bolts on them that hold those on. These just have 2, so these ears can have a tendency to pull up and bend this way and leave a gap in here on the sides. That's why these bigger exhaust gaskets work better. Most of the exhaust systems on most airplanes have slip couplings in them. This is no exception. This is the number 1 stack for the number 1 cylinder. This is for the number 2 cylinder, and the number 1 cylinder just slides into the number 2 cylinder. There's no clamp or anything on it. It just slides in there. And then the number 2 cylinder, the stack coming off of it, this slides into the muffler, and there is a clamp on the muffler that clamps down on it, but it doesn't really provide an airtight seal. So these have a tendency to leak a little bit out of here, and of course out of where they go into the muffler here. I've tried all kinds of different things to keep them from leaking. Tried different kinds of muffler cement. A lot of guys use the high temp RTV. I've tried that. That doesn't really work. I mean, it works for a little while. Well, you go back to wood in a wood stove. If you put a wood stove close to a wall, and the combustion temperature of the wood and the wall is so many degrees, every time that wall is heated and cooled and runs through the heat and cool cycle, the combustion temperature of that wood drops until it'll light off at a really low temperature and burn. Well, the same thing happens, I've seen happen with the high temp RTV. It may have a temperature of 1,000 degrees or something like that, 1,200 degrees. Over time, it deteriorates, and I've seen it catch on fire and burn up and get brittle and falls out of these things and stuff like that. I've tried muffler cements that they sell at the auto parts store. Most of those have silica in them, basically sand, as well as some kind of a binder in it that kind of holds it together, and when they get hot it gets hard and crusty, and then it gets brittle and it starts falling out of the holes and stuff. But then you can't get the pieces apart where it glues itself to them. The thing I've found that works the best for that, to seal them, is this. This is a Q-Sta-Seal 35959. I got it at Napa. They have the same thing, but they have a Napa number on it. I forget what that is. They didn't have it at this Napa store. Like Walker Exhaust System sells the same thing. And that's the best stuff I've seen, I've used. And this is what it is. It's a black tarry. It's nasty. Comes out like that. I smear it on my exhaust gaskets and then put those on and put it on the exhaust the flanges, and then put it on the slip couplings, and it stays soft, so you can get the pieces apart but it seals up pretty good. It really makes a difference on sealing everything up. But like I said, it's nasty. It gets all over everything. Gets on your fingers and your nose and other parts of your body you might touch. It drips down on the airplane, on the engine, and it smears out. When you try to wipe it off, it won't wipe off. You need some kind of solvent. Paint thinner works to get it off. Gasoline will work to get it off. Anyway, it happens to be the best stuff I've found for putting exhaust systems together. So I'll take it like this and just put it on my exhaust gasket here, all the way around it. It doesn't have to be very thick. I try to keep it away from the edge of the exhaust gasket as much as I can. It'll smear out into that, but as it gets hot when you first start it up, it'll drip off of there and get inside the cowling and stuff and make a mess. So anyway, I smear that on there. Then I'll go stick my exhaust gasket up on the flange, put the other one on, and then we'll put the exhaust system on. And then I'll smear some around here on the male section of the slip coupling, and then slide it into the receptacle, the female section of the slip coupling. It's not glue, so that's not gluing that gasket up to the exhaust flange. I'll put a little bit around here where it slips into the muffler. I just put it near the edge. It'll get forced out as we slide it in. I just put one nut on here just to hold this up to keep it from falling off. Not easy. So anyway, you have to keep this loose until I get the number 1 stack started in the number 2 stack, and then get it slid up onto the exhaust port on the engine. The engine is all together. The exhaust system is on. And here's the number 2 cylinder hooked up, runs back into the muffler. Got the clamp on there, all tightened down. I've torqued down the bolts there. Same thing with the number 3 cylinder. Exhaust stack. Now the stacks come forward here, and then they're split. This is the slip coupling here. This is where the number 1 stack comes into the number 2. Back here is where the number 3, or the number 4 comes into the number 3 actually. Number 1, all torqued down. Got the EGT probe mounted in there into the number 3 into the hole it's in. Sure wish somebody would put that hole over here a little bit farther. Of course, then it sticks out into the cowling. So anyway, it was hard getting in there on that screw, that worm, to turn that to tighten it up, because it's right there. It slips around behind, and then it's right there underneath that drain tube. So anyway, the number 3 cylinder is up and tightened up. Here's the support for the stack for the muffler. Well, that number 3 goes in there, that clamps on there and tightened down. So this clamp here goes up to the number 3 cylinder, it ties into the number 3 cylinder head, clamps onto there, onto the exhaust stack, and then we've got another support that goes down here, goes down to the lower exhaust stack out of the muffler. We've got hose here that supplies the air, hot air, into the carburetor. And we've got air coming out of here. This is hot air coming out of here. Goes up to the firewall for the backseat heater. And we've got a adapter here onto the rear of this right baffling, and that comes down. That brings fresh air in, goes into the shroud around the muffler there. Got my oil pressure hose for the oil pressure gauge. Got it. Put another clamp on it. That I never had that one on there before, but that helps take the pressure off of that sending unit. And over here on this side, you got another fresh air duct right here, and this hose runs down, goes into the muffler shroud back here on this side, and then that comes out down there on the bottom of the muffler and down into the cabin heat, which comes out right between my feet, which burns the soles on my shoes. So it's not so bad now because I put a defroster kit in there, and the defroster kit attaches to the outlet there and moves where the air comes out of that back farther and kind of straightens it out so it goes straight instead of coming out at an angle onto my feet. They've also got a hose coming off of it that takes air up and goes into the windshield to defrost the windshield or defog the windshield. Anyway, that's the last thing I have to do on the engine itself. I've got a clamp here on this hose, and that goes down onto the cowling, on the lower cowling, to support that, keep it from sliding around too much. These arms here are supports for the cowling. They come off the engine mount and they go onto the channel on the lower cowling to support it. So that's it. The engine is all together. So the next step is to put the propeller on, propeller and prop spinner on. It looks a lot better with that new baffling on there, the baffling, the new felt on the baffling, and then cleaning the baffling up and painted it, shining up the exhaust tubes so they're not all grungy looking. Anyway, there she is.